recording under the name Thin Lear, and your debut album is coming out on Friday, and it's called Wooden Cave. The Thin Lear obviously has some kind of Shakespearean feel to it. Maybe you can talk about that first.
So I have two stories about the name, and I don't know what reality is anymore, because I go back and forth between what the story is. I was talking with somebody about this the other day. I can't remember if it came out of. I know initially I was looking to go under the moniker of Tin Ear, because I really liked that that turn of phrase. You know, somebody has a tin ear, like they're sort of missing something that they're missing out on. Their perspective is closed or something like that. So I like the way that sounded. But it turns out there's a 70s prog rock band called Thin Lear.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they have one record, and they sounded pretty good to me. So I didn't want to start sort of war with them. So I came up with Thin Lear, just free associating. But then around the same time, I was riding the subway a lot, which obviously I'm not doing as much anymore, but I would sort of doze off. I'd have very long commutes from Queens to where I worked. So I'd sort of be in this fugue state for a good portion of time during my commute, and I'd have interesting ideas about songs and stories, and it got very creative, sometimes terrifying, because I'd wake up past my stop. But there was one time where I was in a fugue state in the middle of a dream and wake kind of place, and I envisioned this old king kind of lounging across from me in the subway seats. And it was around the same time that I thought about Thin Lear as a band name, and just figured, well, this is on my mind. It must be important to me in some way. It must be evocative to me in some way. So I couldn't let it go after that. And then the first EP that I did a couple of years back, I worked with an animator to kind of draw that image, in like the old creepy Tales from the Crypt magazine style that I'm very fond of, and that was that. So it's really a combination of those two stories.
Cool. And I think it's interesting that it was inspired by kind of a dream state of you, because I get the feeling from listening to the album, from reading about it, that dreaming has inspired quite a bit of your music as well.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think I feel like I'm a particularly suppressed dude. I think like a lot of and, songwriting is what happens when an emotion boils over and it has to come out. And it doesn't have to be anger or sadness. I mean, often for me, sadness or frustration will inspire a song more than happiness does, unfortunately. But I think that in the dreams and in the songwriting, I can't control it. I can't censor myself. I can't stuff a feeling down. It has to emerge. So a lot of the songs and the dreams is sort of there's a lot of overlap in the way that I think.
Do you have a process by which you try to remember your dreams? Because I know I have dreams, and then like 2 minutes later they're gone.
they're in the ether. Yeah. I used to have a style where I would kind of be like, all right, if something's valuable, I'm going to remember it.
Right.
And I don't think that that's true anymore, because I forget so much that I love.
Yeah.
That I have a habit now where I write it down, or I'll talk to somebody about it. Typically my wife, if she's right there, and say, hey, this is insane, or whatever it was I was thinking about. And once you get it out, then it's there. It's burned into my mind. And it's the same way with songwriting too, because it used to be the same way, where I wouldn't hunt down a song. I wouldn't hunt down a melody or a lyric. Like if something was sort of stuck in my craw, I would say, you know what, I need to investigate this further and finish this song. But I would never push it. Recently, I've begun the same way with writing down dreams. I've begun to just chase down the song. And yeah, ultimately, when I do that, it usually sounds less organic and I end up not liking it. But as an exercise, it helps for when the inspiration really does strike and I'm ready with a melody or I'm ready with a phrase. So I've seen the value in sort of hunting down the inspiration and not just letting it pass by. If that makes sense.
Right. Oh, that's pretty interesting. And this is your first album, Wooden Cave. So a lot of folks here in New Zealand probably don't know too much about you. maybe you can just give us a brief little bio of how you've gotten to where you are now in succinct form.
I'll do my best. I'll be as concise as possible. I used to release, I was in a band for many years, and then coming out of that, I released a few albums under my own name, Matt Longo, an album called The Low Life, and a few EPs. They're on Bandcamp too. They're under the same Thin Lear banner.
Right.
There came a time where, I was gigging around, and a lot of the songs I was writing at that point were really confessional, like even more traditional singer-songwriter fare. And then I started writing in sort of like what we're talking about, things that were less straightforward, more evocative, less personal, in the sense that I wasn't just narrating what was happening in my life anymore. And it started to feel more uncomfortable to go under my name. So that was when the moniker thing started. And I'm not writing like a Randy Newman style diatribes as characters, though I aspire to what he did. But there are times, like there's a song Maniacs, there's a song Wooden Cave on the record, where I'm talking about people that I disagree with, or people who are indoctrinated. And I don't want anyone to misinterpret what I'm saying and think like, oh, this is Matt. This is what Matt thinks. And so that was when the moniker came about, and it just felt more comfortable to sort of have that barrier.
Right. Gives you a little kind of wiggle room, I guess, to work with. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And so how are you feeling about the impending release of the album?
I feel good. I feel like I've been through something, as almost everybody has at this point, but this release cycle was pretty wild.
Yeah, I can imagine.
We released the single, and this is the first like real proper release that I've done. Everything I've released up to this point has been, I self-release it, which means I do the best I can do. This is the first time I've had like any kind of infrastructure with the label and the PR and that. So it felt very high stakes. And I'm someone who loves to have control over anything anyway, which I think you could probably tell by listening to the record, because there's a lot happening, and it's great. But we released one single in, I think, like the end of February, and then we were going to go to South by Southwest. We were going to do the showcase, and then it got canceled. And I was thinking, wow, this is pretty serious. And then we had this conversation, and luckily the label and the PR and everybody thought that it was an important enough record to kind of, push it later on. So we kicked it back to the end of July. But throughout that whole time, it was really hard to talk about music and to promote in this way, because ultimately I am selling something. Yeah. So especially at the beginning of the virus, it was like, I didn't feel comfortable talking about music or how people buy something. I didn't feel comfortable talking on social media at all, because it didn't necessarily feel, it didn't feel right. And then especially after George Floyd here, and there are some fantastic things happening in this country, and some really horrific things that have always been happening that are now have an even greater spotlight on them. And there are times where it definitely didn't feel appropriate to talk about a record, no matter how important it was to me. So it was challenging to express myself without stepping on someone else's voice. And as somebody who is, I'm not an abrasive kind of guy to begin with. I'm not a super loud kind of person anyway. So it was doubly challenging for someone who already has anxiety about social media and can I be authentic on social media? Is it even made for that? So I was just a real head case throughout.
It's always good for songwriting though, right? Anxiety, a head case.
You are absolutely right, because throughout this whole time, like usually when I'm releasing something, I'm just in that cycle, and I'm like, promo man. I'm not about, songwriting. And this whole time though, I've been writing, and I have like 25 songs, and there are ones I like more than others, but like I've really been stockpiling. And I'm not saying this to try to give other songwriters listening anxiety. Like it usually doesn't happen that way. Usually when I have time to write songs, I have nothing. And then when I have a million things going on, that's when I need to like stop and, go into like a restroom and sing into my voice recorder on the phone to
Right,
capture an idea.
Cool.
So you're right. Yeah.
Well, that's good. And I was really interested in the sound of the record as well, because I was kind of expecting, I didn't know what to expect really, but kind of the typical singer-songwritery thing. And then when I was listening down to it, you could tell there was a group of musicians playing, and then the use of the strings and the arrangements on top of it wasn't like the traditional, kind of syrupy string arrangements. They really kind of interacted with everything else going on. So how did you get that sound?
That was very. I wanted the whole thing to sound like a little bit in terms of the strings, a little bit wild,
yeah.
And very much. A lot of people. Of course, I love Eleanor Rigby. Of course, that was the first. The first use of strings that like just stabbed me in the heart as a kid. But I think that something like Astral Weeks, or where there's the strings are integrated into the song almost as a percussive instrument. There are these flutters, and it sounds like more atmospheric than like a part. I think that was what I was going for on certain songs, and there was a real conscious attempt to try to make it the strings feel more visceral than part.
And so, who wrote the string arrangements? Did you write them?
It was me. It's tricky to answer that because I do not read music, so I couldn't really write them. I can sing them like an idiot. And so a lot of times I will try to kind of tightly control songs in the beginning, and I'll sing the parts to the players. And obviously I have to work with players who can, hear what I'm doing and replicate it. And then they'll write out the parts. And this time around, I did that initially, but then when we got into the studio, I let go a little bit and sort of said to myself, like, in order for this to sound more visceral, I need to let go.
Right.
So ultimately, probably the most interesting solos and little bits on the record did not come from me. It came from me relinquishing control and sort of letting the player just do their thing and be in the moment.
Right. Well, one of the songs you mentioned, Maniacs, and what you just described there reminds me of kind of what was on that track, because you got, the drums are all over the place. There's fiddle in there, and there's this bleeding saxophone. It's wild, man. What was going on?
I wanted to. That's a great. What was going on? That's a great way of talking about that song. I wanted it to feel like a descent, like someone was sort of losing it a little bit. Certainly by the end of the song, when we get to that sax solo, that's really just. You should have been in the room that day. That was not every recording session is a beautiful experience. That one was beautiful because it was just me and the engineer just laughing our asses off, just telling the saxophonist like crazier. Push it more. Yeah. And ultimately he went so far where it was like some more Net Coleman type of thing where we couldn't even use it. But it was maybe the most fun I've had in the studio in a long time. And that's what I was after with this record, is to have these concise, neat pop songs that ultimately feel a little bit unhinged because of some of the instrumentation and some of the choices made. So it's a good blend, hopefully, of both of those things.
Yeah. And the most probably explosive production on the album is Behold You Now, where it just kind of builds up and has this huge finish. What were you thinking there?
Well, I've always wanted to write a suite, as somebody who loves Crosby, Stills and Nash, and they're and Young, and they're multiple, not least of all Young. I love the I'm as pretentious as the next guy. So it's always been a dream of mine to record a suite that actually works and where everything flows into each other, like, Carry On or whatever. And it just worked for this song. And that was another track that was like a character study of a guy who is in like a reheated adolescence kind of period. And it's a direction that I could see my life going in if I made bad choices.
Okay. Now, I would be remiss if we didn't discuss the first track on the album, Netta, I believe it's called, which apparently is based around some 1920s occultist Scottish person. You need to explain.
I do need to explain that. So Netta, and I would recommend checking out this story because it is it's a very evocative, and it sticks in the mind. And it's almost like a Rorschach kind of thing where people hear this story, and I've heard like vastly different interpretations of what it's about or what it means. But this woman, she was sort of a disciple of Aleister Crowley, like that whole occult magic. And I'm definitely not saying that I'm into that. I know very little about it.
Right.
I have a passing interest in it, like sort of like the way Bowie had a passing interest in all kinds of weird occult stuff. So I'm not committed to these ideas, but
we won't hold you to
them. So she went to this island, Iona of Scotland, and she showed up, and she was all jittery. I believe she was a poet, and she was kind of looking for inspiration. It was like the impetus for going to this island, and then she said that she was under attack psychically, that there were other sort of magicians that were trying to take her out, and then they found her one morning dead by the side of the island near the water. She had like a dark robe on, and there was some sort of practice that was happening. And I heard that story. It was the way I heard it was through, I don't know, some podcast or something, and it was presented like one of those magical true crime stories. Like something you would see on Netflix and be like, ooh, spooky. But I heard it just saw mental illness.
Yeah.
That was what I read out of it, and I had such sympathy for her, and I saw her story or her plight as that of an artist, because we go out there on that island on our own, and especially with me, at that time I was trying to make a record and come up with ideas for the record, and when you're at the beginning of that process, it does feel like the shoreline is sort of disappearing. Because in order to really, really make something, for me anyhow, I have to kind of distance myself from people I care about and friends, and you really have to draw within, and it could be months or a year where you're in that state. And I heard her story and was like, I've been in that place. I've been searching for that magic. I mean, ultimately, it hasn't ended that way, and hopefully it won't. But I know other songwriters or other artists who have been in that place. So I had this image in my mind of, all of us as artists kind of rowing out to this island to go pay tribute to this person. And then I wrote the song backwards from that image. So the song ends with that image of all of us artists sort of going on a pilgrimage to this island. And the rest of the song talks about my imagined retelling of what really happened that day, which is not particularly magical.
Right. Yeah, you mentioned other artists. Is there a community of like-minded songwriters, musicians that you hang with in the greater New York area there?
Not so many songwriters. I mean, New York right now is like, obviously right now there's not a lot of hanging out.
Yeah.
I mean, in general, people will tell you something different, but what I've found is like New York is really fragmented, the music scene. So there's a lot of competition. There's not a lot of. I've had trouble finding a like-minded community.
Oh, okay.
There are songwriters that I love, New York musicians that I absolutely love, but it is difficult now to kind of plug into a scene. That's just what I've found.
Okay, I got one more song I want to touch on before we wrap this up. 93 Heat. Seemed particularly interesting, and it starts out with you kind of ruminating on when you're going to be 50 years old, and takes it from there. So maybe you can tell me where that came from.
I had a 93 Infiniti, which at one point was a luxury car.
Right.
It was like 2014, and it was just, I had to like stand on the brakes and really think ahead if I needed to stop, and it was cold.
It was a heat.
It was a heat, and there was a period of my life where I was driving out to see somebody, and eventually that relationship ended, and I would have dreams, again, going back to that, I would have dreams about going out there, and then I just started thinking about that as a metaphor for like not being able to move past somebody. Like, am I still going to be stuck in that teenage romance? Like, is there a way to get over the first broken heart? And ultimately I found that there was, but the song, talks about kind of being trapped in that twilight zone of the first time you get your heart broken, and are you ever going to be able to move past it?
Right, right. Very cool. And thank you for talking to me. I appreciate it. Hopefully you can get out there and do what you need to do to get this record known, because it's got to be frustrating. But for me, it's great, all this new music, because I've got time to listen to it, because, you know, you can't go out and do much else. So,
sure.
So that's cool.
I'm doing the same. I'm listening to a lot of music too.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Well, good luck with everything. Thank you very much, and hope to hear from you again.
Sure thing. Thank you, Marty. Thanks for talking to me.
Bye-bye.